Hello, Riverside. So today's lecture is going to be on cells, the basic building block of life. And as with all of these, we're going to jump right to my um, website and I'll walk you through it. So cells, um, they are self-sufficient little cities that do like all the functions of life. Excuse me. Um, so the first thing is sort of minor. It's just cell theory. Um, cell theory has three basic tenets to it: that all living things are made of cells, that cells are the basic unit of life, and that all cells come from pre-existing cells. um, we can in class we'll debate each of those and talk about them, but for now, those are the beliefs of cell theory. There's two main types of cells: prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Prokaryotes are super simple. They're small, they're tiny, they're small, they're simple, they have no nuclei or no nucleus. Um, Many of the organelles just aren't there. Um, they're usually found in single-celled organisms like bacteria. Eukaryotic cells are much, much larger and more complex. They're what we find in multicellular things like you, me, plants. Um, they have lots of organelles, which, as you might be able to figure out, they're little organs inside the cells that do all of the similar things to what your organs do. Um, and we'll learn about those in a little bit. So prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells, we have all sorts of little objects inside of our cells, organelles, and we'll learn about them. Whereas prokaryotes often don't. Prokaryotes are super simple. They're considered the earliest forms of life. Another division, once you get into eukaryotic cells, is plant cells versus animal cells. Plant cells have two organelles that we don't have. Around their cell membrane, which is an organelle that we have, that animals have, plant cells also have a cell wall, which provides the structure. Um, and they also have an organelle called the chloroplast. The chloroplast makes sugar with sunlight. It takes sunlight and carbon dioxide and makes sugar out of it. It's a process we'll learn about in class. Animal cells tend to be more blobby in shape, somewhat spherical or blob-like, because we don't have a cell wall giving us that structure, and we don't tend to be green because we don't have chloroplasts. Chloroplasts have chlorophyll in them, and that's green, and so plants have green cells. So let's look a little closer at some of these organelles. Um, if you look, there's all sorts of little things inside the cell. The biggest object in there, and where I want to start because it's one of the most important ones, is the nucleus. The nucleus is like this. In sixth grade we learned about the nucleus of an atom, where you might talk about a nuclear family, sort of like the core of it, right? Um, and the nucleus doesn't have to be found in the center of the cell by any stretch, but it's sort of the central thing for the functioning of the cell. Inside the nucleus is the DNA. The DNA codes for everything the cell can do. Whether it can break down sugars and what it lets in and out, and all these other little organelles are all the organelles except mitochondria are coded for in the nucleus, in the DNA in the nucleus. It makes you and a banana a banana. So the nucleus is hugely important. We'll learn about that. The whole last chunk of the year is on DNA and genetics and all about all about the nucleus. But coming out of the nucleus, you see these like road type things, these like communication lines or transportation roads, and that's more or less their function. They're called endoplasmic reticula, or singular would be an endoplasmic reticulum. Big long word. It's just a fancy word for a road. A lot of people abbreviate it ER for endoplasmic reticulum. And it takes the information from the nucleus all whatever is coming out of the nucleus, those codes, and it transports it along to all these little bumps. And you see these bumps are also freely floating around, but there's a lot along those roads. You can think of this as like the road, and this is the industrial park where there's tons of factories. Each of those little dots is a factory. They take the information from the nucleus and they make things from it. They make proteins. And so those little dots are a very vital, very important organelle called a ribosome. Here's the name down here, ribosome. So we have the nucleus and the endoplasmic reticulum and ribosomes. Once you've made something, usually the cell stores it until it's needed. So these are called the Golgi bodies or Golgi apparatus or Golgi vesicles. I guess somebody named Golgi discovered them. And that's where these proteins, that's sort of like the store. That's where the proteins are sort of held until they're needed. Some proteins are made as they're needed, but some are made in advance and they're sort of stored in these Golgi things. Then you have really, really critical thing called a mitochondria. Singular is a mitochondrion. The mitochondria, they make energy. They take sugar and break it down into energy that the cell can use. So whether you're making proteins in the ribosomes or you're breaking down stuff in the lysosomes, whatever you're doing, you need energy. And that energy comes from breaking down sugar in the mitochondria. Then you have, I've just mentioned the lysosomes. Lysosomes, they are, you can think of them as the hospital or the recycling center. They take things that aren't working well anymore, or maybe an invader like a bacterium or whatever, and it breaks it down. It like chops it all up. It's called lysing it, which is why it's called a lysosome. So it lyses it, it chops it all up into its building blocks. And then you can reuse those building blocks. So a bacterium invades you, you chop it up in the lysosome, and then now you have building blocks for making your own things, because we all build out of the same stuff. You also have in here, I'm not seeing a vacuole on this one. I think I'll have to go to the next one. There's a nice vacuole. That's because it's a plant cell. One of the differences between animal and plant cell is plants don't get rid of their wastes as easily as we do. They don't pee. So they'll often store their wastes. And that's what a vacuole is. We have vacuoles as well. It's just a place for storing junk until you can get rid of it. So it's a dump. So there's your vacuole. Of course, I said plants have these chloroplasts that make sugar. I mentioned the organelle of a cell membrane. That cell membrane protects our cells, keeps things out that we want out, lets things in that we want in. So it's sort of like the gate, and a plant also has, besides the cell membrane, it'll have a cell wall, which gives it structure, as I mentioned. Then we're getting on to some sort of minor organelles, but if you want to like memorize a bunch of these exotic names, you can. The centrioles are these cool star-shaped things. They're necessary for the splitting of the cell. So when your cell wants to double and grow, these centrioles will go to opposite sides of the cell and pull the DNA apart, and then your cell can duplicate. Some people will argue the cytoplasm, all this goo in there, is an organelle. I suppose. Some people will argue these what are called the cytoskeleton, or these microtubules, are organelles. Again, they don't, it's like bones floating inside of your body. It's not really providing structure, but some people argue they provide structure. So if you want to be one of those people who argue that, try to grab another point on the test, you're welcome to. So here's a list of all of those that I just mentioned. Cell membrane is the border, cell wall, nucleus, endoplasmic reticulum, ribosomes, Golgi bodies, vacuoles, lysosomes, mitochondria, chloroplasts, centrioles, and then some that could be considered the nucleolus, the nuclear envelope, the cytoplasm, the cytoskeleton. They're really minor. So here's a nice image of some of those organelles, the mitochondria, the nucleus, the endoplasmic reticulum. Here's a close-up of what the cell membrane looks like. The cell membrane is key. We'll come back to it in a lot of our units because the cell membrane lets things in and out. And it's sort of a fluid thing. It floats around. We'll make a model of it in class. And it has these gates, these transmembrane proteins that let things through, but they're gated. So they might have a plug, and that plug only moves for in certain circumstances. And that's the key to like how our senses work and how we communicate within our body between our cells. So it's really, really important. Here's another image of this is letting water in. These ones you can see don't have a gate. Our water transmembrane proteins don't have a gate. The water can come and go out of the cells freely. So water just goes wherever there's more stuff, which leads us nicely. Well, leads us into one of our last things, which is diffusion. But let's finish up these. So this is a picture, a close-up of the mitochondria. Mitochondria is sort of cool. Oh, I got a broken image here of cellular respiration. I'll have to get a better image of that in a moment. This is where energy is made. This is the process by which we make that energy. You don't need to know the Krebs cycle or any of this stuff, but it's just sort of cool. Here's the chloroplast where sugar is made. It's really the reverse process of this. It takes energy in the form of sunlight and carbon dioxide, which you can see is being let out here in 3 places, and reverses it to make sugar. And then they have mitochondria that break that sugar down and give it energy. So plants have both. They make the sugar, and then they turn the sugar into energy. They usually make a net more sugar than they make energy, which is why plants can be so sweet, and also why they can grow, and why they spit out oxygen as a waste product instead of carbon dioxide. So here's how they work. Again, you don't need to know any of this. Here's the endoplasmic reticulum. The rough endoplasmic reticulum is where that's littered with ribosomes, and the smooth is where it doesn't have it. Doesn't really matter. Here's a close-up of a ribosome. This is way blown up because ribosomes are tiny. And we'll learn about this process right here, which is translation. Here's centrioles and them doing their job, pulling the DNA apart. There's the nucleus. There's sort of a blow up of what the nucleus looks like. That's a cell wall, just full of structure. Lysosomes. I tried to give you images of each of the organelles as best I could. Vacuoles, just big blobs that suck up stuff. And then there's diffusion, which I alluded to a moment ago. Diffusion is when stuff goes from where there's a lot of it to where there's not very much. Very common sense stuff. Something very smelly on one side of the room, it's gonna spread and get everywhere, right? However, and so that's what this image is showing. However, if you have a semi-permeable membrane, let's say this membrane only lets the white stuff through and not the little blue dots. Well, there's more white stuff on this side than this side. So the white stuff will actually try to go that way, while the blue stuff tries to go this way. But if the membrane doesn't let the blue stuff through, then it won't. And then it won't move. That's important because our cells let water come and go, but it doesn't let everything else come and go. So if this was a semi-permeable membrane, the water is all going to want to go this way, and you'll see it does. And so we'll learn about terms like hypertonic and hypotonic and isotonic solutions and what happens to cells when placed in those. But in the interest of keeping this short, and that's a very minor point, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it right now. I want to make sure that this video is short enough to be posted to YouTube. So without further ado, I'm going to sign off here. That's cells in a nutshell. Most of this is knowing your cell organelles. And yeah, that's most of the unit. So I'll see you in the next one.